experiment. It's a little bit of an experiment, and many of you have been out in the field with us. So we're gonna, as we like to do, we may call on some of you impromptu. So just get ready. I see Chuck, you got dressed for the occasion, so you're high on my list of putting people on the spot, just so you know. There you go. Yeah, with the hoodie on. Perfect. Some of you have been with us for quite a while. Others found out about us, I think, maybe even through one of David's lectures, his last lecture that he did about the end of 2023 and the beginning of 24. David is his lectures are deeply analytical about things outside of CP. This one is going to be a deep dive into how we do the work, how actually CP is going to move forward. In fieldwork, we're going to dig into kind of first of its kind surveys for fieldwork, some stuff that we're still kind of getting right. So we're going to show you the things that we know are really good, and we're going to show you some things we need to improve on. We're going to be totally open about those things, and we'd love for folks to jump in if they have thoughts towards the end. Ben has asked for comments and questions in the chat. You're opening it up already. Okay. All right. So live running comments and questions as we go. Ben's going to help to field those. So some of these are going to be reviews. Some of these are going to be things that some of you know really well. Others are going to be things that some folks maybe are not familiar with. If there's a term we're using or there's some concept that you're totally lost on, feel free to drop it in the chat. One of the great things about this community is that it is a true community. And so it's not going to just be the fieldwork team that's going to be getting back to you. Folks within the community who have been team leads with us and knocked on doors, feel free to chime in if people have basic questions about the way that we do our work. All right, let's get going. So we're going to start here. And this is just to get us all grounded. This is the CP way. This is embedded in everything that we do in fieldwork, obviously, but in all departments within Common Power, whether it's the Institute, whether it's Action Academy and CP Future, even in marketing. These are the principles that run our organization. And I'll just run through these really quickly. The mindset is we believe democracy should be just and inclusive. You're here. You agree with that. You also believe that we have to take action to make it so. I think we're all done just complaining about the way this country is. 7 years in from Trump, things are pretty understandable about how we got here and what's at stake.
Recording in progress.
Oh, good.
One of the things, someone else is doing a different Zoom. Sounds like it's fascinating. One of the things that's not so common is mojo. And this is something that we do intentionally. We do very intentionally. We'll go into depth about how exactly we do it. 100% sure that other organizations talk about community a lot. It is kind of a buzzword when it comes to justice-oriented organizations, grassroots organizations, political organizations. We really, really lean into the meaning of that word. And teams is actually teams with a capital T. There's a programmatic unit within CP that operates in fieldwork, and we'll talk some more about that. Next generation leaders are a necessity for us in doing this work. 7 years in from Trump, we all understand that we've got to be doing this work for years to come, decades to come. And the only way that some of us can continue to do that is through the next generation of volunteers and leaders, and they're here in front of you. They're going to be on the images here. We're going to quantify some of this for you as well. And finally, mobilize, is we've got to get out in the field and knock on doors. We got to talk to voters. Some of these elections are won by tens of thousands of votes, but many of them that decide the power in a given state or district are decided by a handful of votes, sometimes, scarily enough. Hundreds of votes, thousands of votes. We'll talk about those. Those are where we believe we operate best. And doing that, especially as an organization from a place like Seattle, that is not really a battleground state at all. And I know we've got our issues here. We've got our races, especially U.S. House races. being a Seattle from a very, excuse me, an organization from a very liberal place, going to red states and purple states, we follow the lead of organizations on the ground. That's it. That's a non-negotiable for us. There are some places we don't go to if we don't believe we can work with folks on the ground. They define what success is. They're the ones who are there before we get there, and they're there after, regardless of if we win or lose. We may feel bad about an election, but they have to live with the consequences, so we follow them. All right. So this is everything I just said. I could have just shown this video instead. You can watch this over and over again. It's on our YouTube channel. I'll make it public after this. But this is us this fall in Virginia. And it's just kind of a 1-minute visual tour of everything that's in our 3 M's. It's the community, it's the next generation leadership, it's the camaraderie, it's the partner organizations. Everything is in this video. Those are moments that make me so proud. Seriously, I'm not going to play it. Those make me really proud of what we built here, and I love showing that. I get surprised myself. Sorry. Yeah, it's moving. It's moving to see the type of people we brought together. I talk a lot, but I don't really like to talk and try to convince people. You can see it in this video and in the images who we are as an organization, and it's a minor miracle. Okay, so there's 3 major things that we think differentiate us, and we're gonna roll through these a little quickly. We do this work, and all these images are from this year, and these are all people who volunteered with us this year. So thank you for volunteering. We do this work in teams. So all these folks are a part of Team Virginia. Chuck in the back there is one of our team leads. I was making fun of him earlier, but he's a key foundation for that team. Our team leads are made up of a handful of people that organized across that team. Was Nathania on the team lead set, and they train up all these folks who volunteer with us. They lead us out into different states, and they work with the partner organizations. Most of the heavy lifting around it is done by staff, but the community building, the community management, and especially taking care of folks on the ground is entrusted to our team leads. This team thing that we work in is a big differentiator between us and other organizations, and we'll go into that a little bit more. I want to invite Ben and Puya and to add a little bit here of teams with CP. Or not, Ben? No.
All right, no. No, I was following the chat because it's a little bit rough coming like from your end, and we were trying to figure it out. It's a little choppy. Yeah. And also, I want to take just like a slight in few seconds here. If you can, please do mute for like the duration of like the presentation and drop any questions or comments you might have in the chat. I think sometimes like the going back and forth with some of the sounds is causing that choppiness. So a little PSA there. Thank you. Okay. All right. So the teams that we have, we are gonna go more into like what makes how like our fieldwork has evolved this year, especially on the state teams model. I think for as long as like we've done fieldwork, it has been in teams as early as 2019, 2018 even, and we've just gotten better at it. I would say that like we've and Puya, tag team this with me, please, that like we've gotten better at training the people who lead these teams, making sure that like we are working across generation and across race. Um, and so far, we're taking like this off year to really refine what a team means and how do you build that community both remotely and in person. Because before it was all in person, and then during the pandemic, it was all remote. And now we're trying to figure out what that balance looks like, especially heading into next year.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the one of the biggest benefits of working in team is the community. Doing this kind of work by yourself is very exhausting emotionally, physically. So being in community really does help. And as Ben said, trying to build community remotely and also in person, I find that the balance is not easy. So each year we have tried since coming out of the pandemic, it has been a challenge to some extent to try to find that balance. And this year, I think it was really helpful. Even our team leads, three of them, sorry, were around Seattle area, and one of them was in Georgia actually. So even the team leads themselves were not, all in one place. So um, it is definitely something that we've been working on, and it has been a great success for us this year to have both in-person and remote opportunities and events.
Okay. How am I sounding now? Is this better?
Yes.
Good. All right, let's roll. I'm going to keep my camera off. Maybe that'll help. With local partners, again, we follow the lead of the folks on the ground. This is Ben and Puya in well, you talk about it. Who are you talking to here in this photo?
Yeah, that's me and Ben in Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky, talking to a field organizer, or technically she was a regional organizer for the Democratic Party in Kentucky, and she was sharing the turfs, the neighborhoods that we actually go to canvas. Um, and we were just trying to figure out which ones would make sense for us to take, and how we would kind of divide them up. Um, and as Charles mentioned, we never go into any of these states, neighborhoods with our own maps, with our own data. We always use their materials, since they know how to win their elections. We're just there to support them.
Yeah, and then to the extent that these relationships strengthen, they will often ask us our opinion, but only then do we impact the way that we work in these states. And there's some teams that have been going strong for years, and Team Wisconsin is basically an arm of the Wisconsin Democrats by now. That relationship's so strong. And then we work all year, every year. And these are two images, one from Wisconsin in the wintertime, and then one from Virginia during the summertime. And this is, again, something that we're really proud of. And it's an innovation on our model. We used to only mobilize for general elections, and mostly in the fall. When I started with Common Power back in 2018, it was just let's get ready for the general election and get everybody trained up and ready to go. And now anytime an election pops up, we can send out a team of people. And it's a very cool thing that we're able to do. Different again now than others can show up. So we've been alluding to some of these differences, and I've shied away from doing this in the past because it feels a little bit like I'm dunking on some of the folks that we work with or other people in the industry. But I think it's super important today that we really talk about the difference between us and other organizations, and why we've chosen to do some of the things we do and to not do some of the things that we used to do. So at Common Power, we work across 5 different generations in different races. We've had on one single trip people from Generation Z, Millennial, Gen Xers, Boomers, and also the Silent Generation all in one trip. And I realized that while I was on a trip one time, and it kind of blew my mind. And that's something that I'm really proud of. When I was younger, I used to think there were young people and old people, and realizing the nuances between generations, and that with even within a trip that's got people that are 40 to 60, there's levels of learning and different types of micro communities that are built. And it's just a really cool thing to see live. Door knocking, travel, meals, training, debrief are all done within community. So this is it's uncomfortable for people at first, because some people are kind of like, I got it, I know what I'm doing, or I don't know these people, and so it's kind of weird to kind of get mushed together. But the end result is that last bullet, which is that people return because of the relationships that they've built. In other organizations, volunteers tend to work with people of a similar identity. I think that affinity is super important for people to feel secure, especially if they're starting something new. It's not something that we try to wash away completely. It's understandable that folks kind of gravitate towards people who are like them. And also the way that we grow and learn is by working with people who are different than us. And so we really, really encourage that while we're out in the field. Other organizations really, their standard volunteer experiences are really kind of transactional. Some of you have knocked on doors for campaigns have felt this, where you get really fired up about somebody, and you go to their office, and they basically, they train you in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. They give you a map that's got like 50 doors on it, and you go out by yourself. And when you're done, you're just done. There's nothing else to it. There's no kind of party or thank you or debrief, really. And you're on your own. You don't know if you did well or not, or what comes afterwards. And I've heard people who say they don't like door knocking for that reason. The way that we do it makes people want to come back. And then that last bullet is really something that, if we get to time for Q&A at the end, I can dig into. But leadership around the country, especially in organizations that we've worked with over the years, they're seeing a drop in volunteer engagement, and thus capacity, even donations. People are just really burnt out when it comes to this work. So it's so important that we're able to maintain our capacity and encourage more people to join. Ben, you want to go through this slide?
Yeah, I think it's like to the point about, well, we say that like we have teams and it encourages relationships and people come back for the community. But we also want to know, right? That's our intent. Is it actually felt among you all, the community that we are trying to build? And so far, I would like to say yes, based on our volunteer surveys. We've asked this question, so you can see the how intentional it is. We've woven into our programming. We've asked volunteers that we've surveyed if they agree that they felt a sense of community at CP by the end of the election season for the last 3 years. So starting in 2021. And you can see that like at least half do, most people do, right? You can also see too that like in the beginning, it was only 64.1% in 2021, but we've gotten better at both identifying what community means to us and therefore knowing how to build it better. So last year we had this huge burst of momentum and energy around political action. And so you see that 92.6%. This year's an odd year. So there's a little bit of a less engagement just naturally, but we still managed to maintain that community that we built with each other. Or that's what you told us. So it's really cool to see that trend over time.
Yeah, and this is it's a good check on how we feel. I think that it's easy to get close to a small group of folks who come out over and over again, and to feel like it's the community is super strong no matter what. And this puts some data behind some of the emotions that we feel in the community. The interesting thing about this is normally when you do election work, you only compare odd years to odd years, even years to even years. But it felt like this is the honest look into who we are. and a little bit of an education for everybody about what normally happens during big election years versus the smaller ones. And then it's just, a nod towards transparency. I wish that every year it continued to trend upwards, but the reality is that that's not the case. With local partners. So I'm just going to actually populate both of these. So our local leaders and groups define which neighborhoods work, and we talked about this. Outside organizations, though, often will collect their own data and enter into the state, and that duplicates work. And again, I think that there's a certain methodology that makes sense for organizations that like to collect their own data. We don't do that. That's not something that we do. And I know that when I go to a door and I see, and some of you have experienced this too, you see the literature that's all over the door, and some of it's from the local campaign, and some of it's from some local 501c4s or something, and then you've got all of this other mail that is just sent in from organizations all over the country. And some of those will inundate one neighborhood, and you go to another one and there's no lit there, and they say they've gotten no one in contact with them. And I think we believe there needs to be more coordination between organizations, especially ones that are national or coming from out of state, with the folks that live there every day and will have to live with the consequences. So our trust and respect for the folks on the ground, it boosts their morale. We've had folks that have kind of broken down in tears just by us being there, and then knowing that they're not alone. And the opposite happens when people are not respected and not asked about working in their state or their city. And then these strong relationships feed into each other every single year. So again, Common Power is an organization that is built to be everlasting. That is what we hope to do. And these relationships and how we show up in one year, it just builds on the next year, and it makes that synergy even stronger the following year, until we get to the point where, again, they're asking for our input on maps, or they're ready for us on day one, or they're seeing if our folks need food and water or anything like that while we're in town. And when you don't do that, you just reset every single year. It costs your organization more to spin up during an election cycle. Relationships are really the way to go for building capacity in politics. And then the all year, every year, and I'll bump these both up too. Again, and we'll show you some data around this, but we're nimble enough to show up for big elections and small short notice elections. Other organizations only able to spin up during these really big elections that they know far in advance. There's a special election that was just called for New York City, and we're going to be there for George Santos's seat. It's February 13th, and larger organizations, there's no way that they'd be able to show up for those. Because of our investment in next generation leaders, these college students, they can kind of hop on a plane, and our kind of ear to the ground with our local partners, we knew that was coming, and we have already started planning for that trip. We show up when volunteer capacity is low for states with odd year elections. This is true for Virginia every single year. People forget that Virginia has the majority of their elections in odd years, and they spend all of their capacity in these midterms and these presidentials. Well, we show up for those as well, and our partners love us for that. And then the last one is the next generation leaders. Like I said, we've been in this fight for 7 years now, and we're going to need to be in it for 7 more. We don't get there if we don't bring Ben and Puya and Kyra and other people along with us. And we'll talk some more about those feeder programs, Action Academy, and our educators through the Institute. All right, there's a picture of Ben right there, who's the poster child for our fieldwork effort. Marketing chose this image. It's very compelling stuff right here, Ben. Very compelling. Let's talk about 2023.
So in 2023, given that it was an odd year, we had to be a little bit more strategic about where we focus on and where we travel to. So throughout the year, we took action in 6 different states, and you can see those. Um, some of these elections were special elections, for example, in Pennsylvania, and some of them were, scheduled beforehand, such as, the one in Virginia. So, um, some of them we could plan for them. It was easier for us maybe to have larger teams to go out as we talk about different ways we mobilize our volunteers. But some of them just happened over several weeks, and we had to respond to those very, very quickly. Can you go to the next slide, Charles? Thank you. So here's the data around the number of trips we took. We did 20 trips to the states that are listed above, and we focus on 22 races. That is all the way from, local elections, such as the ones in Washington we had this year, all the way to statewide elections for governorship or the Supreme Court in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And we won 21 of those elections. The only race that we lost was a local election here in Washington State, in Yakima for city council race. So it was a really big year for us, and this is also comparable to the trend that we see generally this year. These were all close and competitive elections, but Democrats this year have done a really, really good job of getting activated and mobilizing their base in and around the Dobbs decision and reproductive rights.
Yeah, so just a quick note on that. I think some of this is us. Yes, for sure. Some of this though is really it's a note on the larger landscape of political engagement and where the voters are. And as a nod to David's most recent lectures, we're winning. Anyone who's worried about the trajectory of the electorate, it's headed towards sanity. Okay, I just want to drop that in there.
Great. So throughout the 2023 election cycle, we had over 300 active volunteers with us. This includes the volunteers who travel with us to knock on doors, the folks who made calls, sent texts, wrote postcards, folks who showed up and did voter registration at Goodwill or other places with Jessica. So overall, we had 300 active volunteers throughout the year, and it resulted in over 30,000 doors being knocked across the states that we just mentioned. And throughout all of our different modes of reaching out to voters, we contacted over 600,000 voters. That includes both in person and remotely. These are estimates. Sometimes, we can't make a perfect kind of a accurate number of the exact number of voters we reach out to. Sometimes, the number of doors we knock on and the number of voters that live in that household, for example, we just don't know. So that's our best estimate. The number is probably higher though.
Okay, so I want to go quickly through the timeline of our fieldwork this year. And we are starting at January because to the point made earlier, right? We don't start in July or August for November elections. Oh my goodness, our first time being out in the field was actually January 6th. Like I distinctively remember landing in Virginia Beach on the anniversary of January 6th and what that means, right? So Aaron Rouse Virginia had a special election that would decide the majority in the state Senate, and Aaron Rouse won that by a shockingly low margin. I believe it was about 600 votes or something like that. But the main point is that we were there, right? We stayed ready, so we were there. And you can see too, in these little blocks of orange throughout the timeline are fieldwork trips. So during the first half of the year, it was not an exaggeration to say that we traveled almost every month, and they were mainly for special elections. So Charles, you can speed through that really quickly. And then Virginia, we were there for the primary elections. This was a case where the primary was the general, so that like whoever made it through the primary would definitely get elected in the general. But we wanted to make our presence known, one, to support our partners, and also two, to push through really amazing progressive candidates. So that's kind of like all the way through September. And then like in the summer where, you know, people shouldn't have elections if they're saying, we pivoted to advocacy. So we made calls. Thank you again to all those amazing remote volunteers for the to defeat issue 1, which we did. And you can see the impact of that action when the ballot initiative was won in Ohio later in fall. Okay, so the next slide is about our fall fieldwork. And I had to make it on a separate slide because we did quite a lot. So the first thing, like, we happened in September, again, another special election. You can definitely see the trend here for this year. It's a series of special elections with super high political stakes, highlighting the necessary, what it means to maintain a majority in any chamber of the government. So while we were in Pennsylvania, we also had this massive local voter registration campaign here in Washington, where we partnered with our Goodwill partner, and we registered a bunch of people across 5 counties, 11 stores in 4 days. So that happened simultaneously. And that's a nod to our capacity of our team, that we can do multiple operations at once. And then once October hit, it's just travel, travel, travel. We sent small teams to Kentucky and Pennsylvania and did an extended stay for, like, I believe almost 2 weeks in Virginia. First in Virginia Beach, and then in Richmond for the general election. And the most amazing thing that came out of that, right, was that one, we retained the majority in the state Senate, but we also flipped the House, which has massive implications for the state as we continue on next year.
Can I just, so this Pennsylvania, you said that you talked about Pennsylvania being this like the 3rd special election or something. The state house was up for grabs 3 times. Was it 4 times, Booyah?
Yeah, it was 4 times technically. It came down to 4 seats. Yeah, it was wild.
And and like that, it wasn't like they like announced that in January. That rolled out like one election after another, and we had to keep adding Pennsylvania to our list of travel, right?
That's right. Some of these just happened and they announced the elections coming up in like 4 weeks. I remember the first one that happened in May. We were on the learning tour, if you remember, Charles, and we were on the bus and I came up to you
That's
and
right.
it was like, there's a special election, like 3 weeks, like 20 something days, and it will decide who can control the state house. And while I was on the bus, I reached out to some of our volunteers to see if they're available to go out and knock on doors. So yeah, some of these just happened over a couple weeks.
All right. So let's talk about the evolution of fieldwork now in 2023. And I want to just, this is a shout out to one to leadership, her strategic leadership, and rethinking what fieldwork could be for this year. Her and I worked side by side on this. I had run fieldwork the previous year. That was where I started with Common Power, and it was fitting to go back to it. Team Wisconsin is Team Wisconsin was the first team that I did work with at CP, and the DNA of the beginning of Common Power is kind of written all over that team. But the best parts of it were innovated on for this year. Ben, can you lead us through some of the different ways that we're doing fieldwork in 2023? And then later on, we'll talk about how those will move into 24, or maybe as we go along.
For sure. I think it can. So the next session is going to talk about like how we reimagine fieldwork, right? So initially, you would think about fieldwork as just talking to voters, right? That voter engagement piece where you're physically or on the phones, you know, making change with a voter. However, we also realized this year that if we were to sustain this work and build our capacity, that we also needed to think about how to continue our education as volunteers and also to develop leaders along the way. So that's the equation that you see here. Fieldwork is no longer just a voter engagement operation. It is voter engagement plus political education plus leadership development. And we're going to touch more on that last two in something that we rolled out this year called Fieldwork Assembly. So put that for later. However, just to kind of like think about our innovations for this year, right? The first thing that we really kind of like honed in on was training. So how do we stay ready to respond to these special elections that pop up, or to think about how to keep ourselves honed in these off years, or not off years, my bad, odd years, so that we can be ready to go and hit the ground running on these midterms and presidential elections. That means evergreen trainings. So you may have done one of these or all of these, right? But it's that's right, Kyra, stay ready so you don't got to get ready. That's why we got this training series this year, starting with the intro, different ways you can engage voters, and then finally plugging into our door knocking operation, traveling with us with CP. So it's not just like a one-off, things that happen as you want to volunteer or during general elections. It's year-round. The second thing that we thought about is not just training. It's also engaging the volunteer community. And this was a learning experience for us, because 2023 was like when we had to figure out how to transition out of solely remote engagement and community building through the pandemic. So we leaned hard into these in-person stuff. And that accumulated in things like our once a month fieldwork gatherings, a callback to when we would gather at Washington Hall. All the way back there, and we invited guest speakers. Tram Nguyen came to speak with us, like the ED of New Virginia Majority, our main partner this year. And it was a way for us to reestablish our connection with each other in person. And then we also had these amazing opportunities to do remote opportunities, right? Like writing postcards with each other. And then these like random pop-ups where we would just get together and hang out and learn and rally around specific events, like a lecture from the Institute, right? Or maybe some wild thing is going down politically, or just to meet and greet each other. So, and then beyond that, we also—
Well, I'm gonna pause here for 1 second.
Yeah.
Pause here one second, because this mixture of, this slide and the previous one. So virtual trainings. Is my sound coming through okay? Good. Okay. Virtual trainings mixed in with these in-person events. It's tough. It was tough to find the right mix. And just as a nod towards the things that we didn't hit the bullseye on, I think we had maybe too many of the virtual trainings, and not enough sense of that people really wanted to get back in person. And then with the in-person events, I think that we thought that folks wanted to do these like really big events like we did back in the day pre-COVID. We used to have events that would pack the room with 100, 200 people. And that's not the case. It looks like they want more intimate, smaller events. They want to meet at a coffee shop. They want to meet at a brewery. And you all told us that, and so we kind of learned as we went along. And so next year, we're taking all of this in. We're going to still have virtual and in-person events, but the mix of those will probably be less kind of shotgun across the entire calendar, and more kind of placed where it makes sense, where we think the demand will be highest.
Exactly. And then moving on to like what it means to build capacity here. So we realized that if we need to pull this off successfully in 2024, it can't just be me, Puya, Jessica, Maria, and like half of Charles, right? And whatever time like we have out of that to do everything. So we had to think about what is the organization structure here where we can leverage our volunteers, not just to talk to voters or like maybe recruit your friends along the way, I don't know, but to actually be there in the process for other volunteers. So this year we piloted volunteer trainers and committees. So we had a volunteer training committee to help us think through what kind of training we might need for next year, and to be that pulse on what a volunteer might need, right? Something that we might have a blind spot to. And then also an events committee to really think through, okay, like what is it that will keep our community engaged? So those structures gave us information about how we might build out these new volunteer lead roles for next year. And a little bit of a preview here, like we might have people helping community sessions during phone banking, during text banking, definitely postcarding, right? Carolyn, I see you in there. I'm gonna tap you to be a postcard lead. You just signed yourself up. And then like these other things that like really increase our capacity and really extend the meaning of community for us. So it's not solely centralized within the Fieldwork team.
Yeah, I think Charlie in the chat earlier mentioned that it was hard to build community when you're doing remote work, and we totally hear that. And next year, we're actually going to have a group of volunteer leads that focus solely on remote work. I think initially we thought that all the remote work should be aligned with each of the states. And as we've all been doing remote work, we realized that what matters less is which state we work with. Everyone wants to do calls in the place where we think the most where we're most needed. What we really want is to be as effective as possible and do it with other people. So we're going to tap some of the best of the best phone bankers, and we're going to have them lead the rest of y'all through phone banking in all the states where we need to do that remote work this year.
For sure. And then the last part here, which might be one of the most organic evolution of our programming, is that before we had these state teams, right? And we would plan trips, like we would know when the general election is. And maybe if we had a good enough partnership, we might plan further trips, right, out into the year. But we had a deadline, and that was usually election date in November. However, that did not give us the flexibility to really be there in races that were smaller, races that pop up, or races like where it would be strategically important for us to be there, but not necessarily important for our volunteer force to be there. So there are other reasons, right, to travel with CP that we necessarily can't do with the state team structure. So what we did was we found another way to mobilize, and we can talk, and there's like at a later point, we'll talk about the differences between those things. But you can see here, right, we are going to keep planning our action with state teams, but we are also in a parallel lane, building out critical selective operations to respond whenever we need to.
And we'll go into some depth about that.
Yep.
In further slides. This is our team that hit Virginia Beach in January, and that's Virginia State Senator Aaron Rouse, who won by 696 votes. We knocked on 1,000 doors in that election. Those handful of people right there talking to him are all Common Power students from our Action Academy program. Some of them staff. There's Puya and Ben there, you can see. But Matthew and Olivia and Blossom and Asha are there as well. They knocked on 1,000 doors and talked to 2,000 voters. And we think we made a difference there, for sure. Okay, so we're going to go through some of our strengths here that we've already said, but we're going to go in depth on some of these. We know we can mobilize for races large and small at a moment's notice. Again, we do this work all year, every year, whenever the need arises. But this is another way to talk about the structures of deployment for volunteers, both remote and in person. And then we'll get to that bottom one. The CSOs, as Ben has named them, that are really a game changer for.
Yeah, so y'all know this. So we can like populate actually the first two columns with rows really quickly. I think like you've seen this, but maybe not as like a comparison against each other. So if for state teams, right, like that they're planned and led by team leads, it's usually a larger group, and there's this special emphasis on working across difference, whether that be generational or race, right? And we really facilitate that when we're on the ground with each other and in community building. Remote opportunities are much more accessible, and they're much more available year round. And there's another reason why we have remote opportunities is something that our partners called layered touches, so multiple voter touches. You might send a postcard to a voter and call them 3 weeks later, and like maybe 5 weeks later, someone is knocking on their door, right? That's the power there that door knocking trips that don't necessarily have. However, with the CSOs here, there's, instead of like being led by team leads, they're usually led by staff because we have all the information and partnerships and resources to mobilize quickly. Is that popping up? There you go, thanks. But because it is like at a smaller, because it is so short notice, right? We have to do smaller groups and then we run at a faster pace. And that looks like, and that's what you saw in the slide before, just like a handful of people, usually young, because college students, younger folks can like drop things a lot quicker and just like come out with us for a weekend. And we hit doors. That's actually the priority here. And then the second opportunity that we have is to really take these young people who are with us for this extended amount of time and have intensive leadership development. Some of those, some of the young folks that we take on CSOs become team leads down the line. Sometimes we invite team leads in training to come on CSO, so they get a sense of what it's like to lead a team on the ground before they actually do it themselves for a general election. So all in all, these are all the different tools. We think about them as tools that we apply to different problems, and how we leverage them is how we most efficiently and effectively address whatever political mess is going on and what we plan to do with that. Charles, next slide.
Are you not seeing it? Are you
There
seeing
we go.
it?
What? Okay, yeah, we're good. We're good. I think there's like a slight lag, I think is what it is. So, all right. Now I'm going to invite Puya to talk to me about this because he's actually the one who aggregated all this data. So this is kind of like, it's like a way to show you again, like what is the use and effectiveness of the different ways that we deploy, right? You can see on the CSOs, right? We knock much more doors than we do on like a state team trip, much higher than our average. And that's because that's what we emphasize. And Puya, do you have anything else to add here?
Yeah, as y'all can see, with CSO trips, as Ben mentioned, they're faster pace, and we do almost 50% more doors, like an average volunteer on a daily basis does 50% more doors. Those trips tend to be younger volunteers, as Ben mentioned earlier, but they're also smaller in size. The average CSO trip is about 7 volunteers compared to 18 volunteers. So naturally, figuring out the logistics for those 18 people compared to 7 just makes things go a little bit slower. But at the same time, you can kind of see that a CSO trips we just do more doors. An average volunteer just does more doors throughout the entire trip as well. So yeah, these are kind of the data to back up what we mentioned before on the previous slide.
Yeah, so I think that the CSO trip, I think our gut told us that we were able to knock on more doors than you would think, but the data supports this. This is a tool in our toolkit, has been said. We will definitely deploy these now as needed, especially with special elections. But you can see it's, in less time, folks who go on CSO trips can knock on more doors as the average. That's such an awesome revelation. All right, another strength
Charles, you're breaking up. I just have to say it.
we were most effective in races with tight field margins. We will go ahead, take it.
No, oh, okay, no, Puya, I just wanted to let you know that you're kind of breaking up. But
Yeah, I can take this on. So as we mentioned, Aaron Rouse, he had a special election coming up in January, and Charles kind of already mentioned this, but the margin of victory was only 696 votes. This election decided who will control the state Senate. And right there in that picture, you can see the entire group. That's the whole group that was traveling to knock on doors for Aaron Rouse for 3 days, and we contacted 2,000 voters. This is what we call when the activities that you have on the ground, the actual door knocking, makes the difference. So we were the fill margin in that election. And if Charles can go to the next slide. Maybe. Well, the impact, I can just talk about that until the slides go up. The impacts were huge. As many of you may remember, and Ben kind of mentioned this earlier as well, we flipped the state house. So Republicans control the state house. They control the governorship. And Aaron Rouse was the difference between a trifecta of Republicans in Virginia. So he was able, his election enabled Democrats to stop Virginia Republicans to turn the state into another Florida, essentially. He stopped a lot of the restricting transgender bills that were coming through. Virginia is the only state in the South that does not have a ridiculous abortion and reproductive right restriction. It is wild. Virginia is the only one, the former Confederacy, House of the Confederacy. And it was all because of this election and Rouse being elected in that state. The next slide, if you can go through that, Ben. Was this general election. We had Michael Fagan, who was running for State House, District 97. Some of the folks on this call were actually in Virginia Beach. I see Teresa on my screen. Michael won his election by less than 1,200 votes. That was the margin. And Common Power contacted over 5,000 voters in Virginia Beach. When you have these big of a difference, you can really say you, as a voter and as an organization, truly made a difference in that election. That you can really say, if we were not in Virginia Beach, if we were not door knocking, sending texts, making calls, there's a good chance Michael would have not won, or it would have been much more difficult through recounts and legal disputes. So, and the result of his election was Democrats flipping the state house. He was the 51st seat that were announced and was confirmed that he has won his election. Currently, there is one seat that Republicans are leading. It is quite close. The chances are that Republicans are going to win that seat, so it's going to be 51 to 49. And Michael's race was the closest election for the state house that Democrats won. And we also, outside of Virginia, we said that we were also active in Washington State. We had a group of folks, Ellie, Jenny, and Maria lead small teams out to Eastern Washington to focus on some local elections here at home, city council races and mayoral races in Sunnyside, Yakima, and Spokane. We had Leslie actually lead teams in Spokane. And they contacted over 2,500 voters in Sunnyside. The candidates, Vicky, Karen, and also Jorge, they were all running for city council races in Sunnyside, and all of them won their elections by less than 350 votes. I don't know if Maria, if you're still here to talk a little bit more about the experience of being there, working on these close elections, because I was not personally in Eastern Washington, or maybe Ellie or Jenny.
Of
I don't
course.
think Maria.
I'm here. Hi, everybody. It was amazing. As you can see, the margins are really close. You can actually, advocacy did an amazing job at also just recording the incredible margins, as Puya mentioned. Actually, I'm gonna make a little correction here, if it's all right. Actually, the 2,500 voters are divided between Yakima and Sunnyside, Washington. And so we did maybe like half of that. A little bit over half of that was definitely in Sunnyside of that number there. Thank you, Puya. Yes, Jorge, Karen, and Vicky Fausto were elected to the city council. It is a historical win for for Sunnyside, as there has never been this much representation actually ever in their city council, and all Democrat, which is, I mean, well, you know, progressive, I would say, which is incredible for that community, as they are representing a large population there of immigrant and Latino population there in Sunnyside. And then in Spokane, great outcome there too, with Lisa Brown winning. We did around 500 doors there. Smaller group, but still mighty, with Leslie. Shout out to Leslie for leading that. And Ellie and Jenny for their amazing support and helping coordinate those efforts down there. So shout out to them. It was an incredible win. We also actually won it's not on here, but we also supported a school board. It was a slate of the city council and the school board folks were running together in the slate, and one of the school board positions did win in Sunnyside. So that's also really exciting, that there is much more representation there now, and very proud that we were part of that work. And of course, close to my heart because, you know, as I identify as Latino and an immigrant as well. So pretty awesome. Thank you all for the support. I can shout out a few folks here on the call who were there to support, Kate and Deborah. And I mean, Judy and so many folks that I see, some here, some are not, but just shout out to all the awesome volunteers who made it happen. And we're excited for next year.
So we did mention that, you know, we follow the lead of our partner organizations, and they do appreciate the way that we work with them, that we follow their leads. But we can put that aside and look at the numbers. About 41.7% of our partners did mention that we had a higher contact rate than average. When we go into communities with interracial and intergenerational groups, it does increase our chances of being able to touch more voters as compared to if you send in groups, you know, if we send in a group of young BIPOC volunteers into a wealthy white neighborhood, chances are they're not going to be able to get a lot of folks at the doors. So by mixing up the groups, having a lot of diversity, we can go into different sort of neighborhoods, and it enables us to work and reach out to different communities. Or for example, Poder being able to send in volunteers who do speak Spanish and English into communities that are predominantly Latinx does really help us reaching out to those communities. But something that really does make me proud is that every single one of our partners did agree that our volunteer capacity increased their voter engagement while we're on the ground. That is our hope, that we can increase voter engagement and we can help our democracy grow and strengthen through our work.
Yeah, I also want to jump in here for a little bit to go back to that contact rate percentage, because I think it's extremely significant, right? I think someone put into the chat that real difference happens when a voter actually knows what's going on. Like they actually get information from you about where to vote, how to vote, and all of that, right? And that's in the contact rate, not necessarily in doors we knocked on or stuff like that. This is like really what conversations are we having with people at doors? And I believe, Puya, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's actually on average that maybe you would hit 10 doors and maybe talk to one person, like maybe one or two people. So for our partners to say that like we are making a difference in like having in that crucial moment at a door with someone means a lot. It means more than just kind of like we're increasing their capacity and passing out literature or tabling or whatever. Like we're making sure that like information that they want disseminated actually makes it to a voter. And that number is something that we want to increase next year. So improving on our contact rate.
Well, can we talk about that for 1 second? Because this 41%, it doesn't mean that there's 60% that says that we're not doing well or that we don't have a good contact rate. So this 41% is for higher than average. The number for you're about on average. That number is what here, Ben?
Is 59.3. If you add those two numbers together, you should get 100. So everyone said that like we did as average or higher.
Yes. And I think this is us being super modest but we're doing well.
All right. So here's the third thing that we learned this year and really, really leaned into is that when we continue our education and leadership development in the field, we actually are better volunteers. We are better at talking to voters. We're better at our jobs when we do these things. And this is also in recognition that CP is not just fieldwork, right? Fieldwork is the endpoint of common power. Education begins with people before they even hit fieldwork. Leadership development begins with people before they even hit fieldwork. And now we're just really continuing that journey for people when they're on the ground with us. And that is done through this program that we call Fieldwork Assembly.
Let me back up for 1 second.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, Faye mentioned this.
Okay.
So that monument is in Virginia. It's a newer monument. I want to say it's only a handful of years old. That is a monument to enslaved Africans and some of the first that came to North America. Emancipation Monument. Thank you, Puya. And it's being led by a local professor. So this is Team Virginia here that is taking time out of our schedule to be more educated about the history and the places where we're going to be knocking on doors. What that does for us is it gives us new respect for some of the people in their history, but also some of the headwinds. And when you think about the legacy of slavery in America, and this being one of the places that it has had the longest impact, it makes you feel differently about some of these, for instance, African American neighborhoods that we knock on doors. Like how much are they kind of still under the ripple effect of their ancestors having been the first to come to this country in the way that they did. So we learn about that firsthand, and we do it everywhere where we knock on doors.
Sorry. Yes, exactly. And it's not just the history, because history grounds you and it's always tied to the contemporary work, but we do try to like tie it to contemporary work because that's what we're here for, right? Like we're making history, we're not just learning about it. So that means that we not only invite professors out, subject matter expertise in what has happened before, we also invite local leaders, people who are defining what civic looks like in this local environment, who are doing the work before us and will continue to do it after us. We are learning from them about how to engage voters in their own backyard, in their own communities, because that's honestly respect. That is respect, because we are out-of-state volunteers. A part of understanding that we don't live here, that we follow the lead of our partners, means that we need to know and we need to understand what that means, and we need to show that respect all the way through. So we don't just show up in a neighborhood and just talk to people and be a volunteer and then just go after we win, but we really do take the time to understand why we're here and what it is and what our impact could be, right? So that is all encompassing in political education. Leadership development is somehow simultaneously clear and vague. So leadership development, we started with working with young leaders, next generation leaders. So when we rolled out and piloted this program, we actually did it on CSOs, because that's another benefit to CSOs, because you can try out new things with a smaller group that's focused on leadership development. So we would have our next generation leaders, think through working across difference, having debates, making presentations about the work that they're doing, all of these things. And then somewhere along the year, we realized that leadership development is a shared effort. It is something that everybody can participate in and should participate in. So in Virginia, with the help and honestly, the strategic mindset of Dr. Devin Geary, someone who came into Common Power staff earlier this year, who specializes in how do we work across difference and communicate across difference, we started thinking about leadership development within that realm. Like, how do we become better volunteers if we understand how to communicate across difference? Not just political difference, which is very useful when you're at a door, talking to a voter, but also with each other. And when you're on teams that don't necessarily look like you, think like you, or act like you, but now you're here with a common purpose. So all of those things we're trying out this year. And I was a little nervous, but we did survey people to get feedback. And it looks like it's pretty cool. Like we thought it was pretty cool, but we're really grateful that you think it's pretty cool too. So 93% of volunteers who went through or experienced fieldwork assembly on the ground agreed that, the political education did allow them to be more effective when talking to voters because they have that knowledge now that they can draw on, which was the intent. And so we're glad that that is being realized. And about 87% of volunteers agreed that assembly invited conversations around working across difference, which is tricky at best. But this does show us that we're heading in the right direction, and we're going to keep working on it for 2024. Okay. All right. Okay. So a little bit of a pivot here, because I do want to call out what does it mean to think about leadership development and education. We really can't forget that our volunteers come from different spaces before they land here, right? So when we think about fieldwork, it's usually like, the general volunteer. Like you might come from us from anywhere and everywhere, right? You found us somehow, maybe through a billboard, but you volunteer with us. But there are, and some of you might have already had education through the Institute, right? Lectures and all of that with Dr. Scott, David, etc. So you come in with some kind of knowledge to us and you volunteer as a volunteer. There's also this other group that comes from Action Academy. So they're prepped to do civic engagement and working across difference within that space that is for Gen Zers, for college-age students, Action Academy, going from learning to applying that learning with us in the field. There's also this third group of educators. Shout out to educators in the room. Like y'all came in through learning tours with the Institute, got hooked on this and was like, what can I do? This is so cool. What else can I do? And then you came to us with that energy and with that passion and with that knowledge. So you all come to volunteer or become like a volunteer lead. Some of our volunteers, alumni, educators, end up being volunteer trainers, right? Serving on committees or being tapped to lead phone banks, et cetera, et cetera. So we hope to develop people into these increasing leadership roles. We tried that this year. We want to do it next year. And the end of that is to be a team lead. So any volunteer with us, if you're coming from Action Academy, if you're coming from the Institute as educators or otherwise, or anywhere, right? Eventually, we hope that we can develop you all to lead other volunteers and to lead state teams and have this experience that you also experienced.
Yeah, I think one more piece on this is that this also, this factors into the CP pipeline. Those people who are shining standouts as team leads are people who we consider to be contractors with us at CP and then eventually full-time employees. And that's the pathway that Ben took. It's the pathway that Puya took. Jessica's on that path right now and many others. And what we end up with by the time folks get to that full-time employee level are people who are super passionate about the work, people who really understand our organization, people who understand the cause and agree with it and agree with the way that we're doing it. And I'd say that, as somebody who runs this organization, I just realized I never said who I was, which I do every time. I think I'm the executive director of Common Power. As somebody responsible for all the employees at this organization, it feels like we've finally reached a level of selecting the best and the brightest and the most passionate about our work and have them level up and then lead other people through that pipeline. And Ben is one of those, is somebody who is the person who runs our field work now.
All right, y'all.
All right.
You're taking this.
Well, this is the part where once people are kind of bought into CP, and there are some folks who support us financially on this call. This is not a call for money, but it is I think the first time we've been like this transparent about what the cost is of a trip. If anyone is thinking about going on a trip or thinking about possibly donating so that other people can go on trips, we wanted to just lay it all out on what a trip costs. What the reality of volunteering, period, is that volunteering is a privilege. People with an excess of time and money can then think about things beyond the food in their fridge and what time they have to be at work next week, and they can think about taking these trips with us. Gen Zers, folks that are in college, are people who are not going to have that excess income, at least. And educators, for sure, are not going to, K through 12 educators who now we've got dozens of them in our community, they're not going to have the resources. And so when we say, I'm going to pay for you to go on this trip, this is what the cost looks like for CP. So we're not going to go through every single line item here, but as you can imagine, you all have traveled. And this is, let me just say, this is the kind of the highest bar. We have folks that fly from the West Coast and go do work on the, the East Coast. And then if we're all traveling during peak holiday season, or around the time that a lot of other people are flying into a state like Georgia, the costs go up for hotels and for flights. So this is not just the cost of an individual if they wanted to go by themselves. We also factored in the cost for staff. So again, when we show up, we've got multiple layers of community. There are people like Ben and Pui who are full-time staff that are on the ground with folks. We've got team leads we pay a stipend to. If folks are Gen Z leaders, we pay them per hour. So we pay them $24 an hour minimum to do team lead work with us if they're Gen Zers. And so that cost kind of stacks. So around $3,000 to pay for someone to knock on doors if there's someone who can't pay for their own way. Anything you want to add to that, Ben?
I would say that, like, yeah, you can take a look at this and then you can factor in like what counts. I would say lodging and meals are pretty even across all volunteers. So everybody needs a place to stay. Everybody needs to think about how they're going to eat. Airfare and rental car are pretty flexible. And I don't know, I just also want to plug too that like Fieldwork would not work without our amazing finance and operations team. And like this is really kind of like part of us being able to break this down is the systems that we have on the back end to even track these costs. Because how are you able to track costs for a volunteer or someone that we're helping to bring out there? And it's really with all these support systems that we have at Common Power that we're even able to give you this table and to plan for future trips and programming.
Yeah, good shout out. Good shout out. Asha is one of them. Van is another one. Marcy leads that department. Kudos to them. Yeah. And we are a very complex organization. I think that we've got an organization, a company that we pay out of DC to help us on the regulatory side, because we have 4 distinct entities that make up Common Power. We have a C3, a 501c3, a 501c4, a PAC, and a super PAC, so that we can take in money in all different ways, and then also participate in races all over the country. And then in some of these states, we have to also form up state-based PACs or organizations, and they help us to do that. And one day I remember asking our contact there, which organizations around the country look like us in terms of the way we're structured financially. And he said the closest thing he could come up with was the DCCC, which made me feel really good about the fact that we're doing something innovative, and then also made me scared because holy crap, we're as complex as the DCCC. Big thoughts there. All right. And this last one is just, it's kind of bottom line. This is about you all. It's about our volunteers and about how they feel about the work. This is a number that we've asked, a question we've asked for years now. One is about how our volunteers feel themselves, and another is how they feel about Common Power all up. And those are pretty high numbers. This shows us that we're on track. People feel like when they come do work with us, they're making an impact. And at the end of the day, that is what we deliver to everyone who is a part of this community. by locking in with us, by contributing to us, time or treasure, you're making a bet on the future. You're making a bet on the fact that the energy you're going to be spending with us is going to make a difference. And we're making a difference, y'all. We're doing it.
All right, Puya, what are we doing in 2024? Just like a little bit of like, don't expect too much from this section. We have a whole ass other, like, sorry, whoops. We have another event for this. Oh no. We have another event for this in January. So this is really more of like a sneak peek preview, especially to our primary actions.
Hold on. Don't censor yourself, because David Domke curses in his lectures all the time, and people pay money for those. So you
Shit,
can
you're right.
curse all you want.
That's right. All right, I'm here for
Yeah.
that. Okay,
Yes,
Puya.
yes.
Awesome. I will try my best not to curse, but here are the states that we're going to go to in the primary, and we're going to go into more details about the timeline and also the reasons we have chosen the states. But as you can see, these are competitive states that you hear all the time in the news about them, and you hear about them in, CP, and we are going to these states for the primary, and we will be in all of these states for the general as well. But these are not all the states that will be involved in the general season. Once you come to our event in January, we'll have a much better idea of the states we will be involved in the general election. But part of it is that things are just changing. Mark Elias just 2 days ago mentioned that they're suing the state of North Carolina over their congressional maps. So as maps get clarified and get solidified, our plans are going to adjust as well. So these are just for the primary season for now. So first up, we have North Carolina and Texas. On March 5th, they have their primary. That's Super Tuesday. There's going to be a lot of excitement around those states. Then 2 weeks after that, you got Ohio, super important state for the general. And that's our way of trying to get involved in and make some partnerships. Pennsylvania, April 23rd, Nevada in June, and then we got Washington, Wisconsin later in August. And we obviously have the general election coming up in November. You can expect CP to be active on the ground from mid-September, late September, all the way through November. So within that time window, regardless of the state and the specific dates, you can expect us to be involved and on the ground.
Yeah, and so let me just, so we're showing these because we will be on the ground in all of those states prior to the election dates. Carrie just dropped in the chat that she's going to add one there for Wisconsin, which is great. But we're going to be knocking on doors in all these states. So this is the time where if you know you're going to join us for knocking on doors, you need to take a screenshot of this and mark your calendars. We're going to also have this on the Fieldwork page for reference. And this video will also go onto YouTube later on, so you can share it and look back on it. But if you're looking to block out your calendar for travel, for volunteering with us, you're going to want to do it for one of these primary election states, and then the general election leading up to November 5th.
Yeah. I wonder, should I go to the website really quick and just show them that page that you're talking about?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, hold on a second then.
Yeah, can you show it from the homepage, actually, how you're navigating it, just so
Yeah,
folks
exactly.
can find it?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Give me 1 second. Y'all pray for me that this thing don't crash.
Thank you for everybody who's with us here. We got 50 folks or so. We didn't say when we would end, but I think most folks expect about an hour for these events. So thank you for hanging out with us.
Wait, truly, we did say when we would end, though.
We kind of
say-
did.
We
said
did. We
at
were-
6.
We did. We did.
So
Why do we
thanks for
do
hanging
that?
out.
We shouldn't have done that.
Well,
Anytime
next time, then.
I'm talking, we need to allot 90 minutes. Okay, just for
Okay.
the reference.
Y'all see this?
Yep, let's do it.
Cool. All right, this is commonpower.org. Y'all been here. Y'all know this. Go to Fieldwork. If you hover over it, you don't necessarily have to click it. Go to Get to Work. So this is an updated page right here. If you were here just like a couple months ago, this had all of the steps to join us for door knocking or taking action in 2023. It currently reflects 2024 preparation. And if you go through that, these are all the steps that we just went over. Mark your calendars. It'll take you to a document where you can see all of our tentative travel date ranges, which is what that table is based on. And I will add Wisconsin soon, Carrie, promise. Fill out the interest form and or to click on this, right? This takes you to our interest form, quick, easy. If you fill this out, we'll let you know when we have those state teams stood up, when we have those opportunities live and going. To be honest, right, we wish we could do it earlier, but that really is something that depends on the election cycle, and we have no control over that. So what we do have control over is how we plan our vacations and trips. So if you think you have like a date range that would work, just mark your interest, and that means that we know, to put you in contact with team leads or just in general when like we have those dates finalized, and you can get more information about how to do that. So very quick form, submit your interest. I need to figure out how to get back into the other thing. hold on.
That's okay. That's okay. So let me just also say while you're doing that, go ahead and pull it up.
No, that's it.
A couple things. If you forget all of this stuff, it's on our website. Go to our website. Also, the newsletter. Sign up for the newsletter because we're going to remind people and remind them again and remind them again how to sign up with CP, when our next events are, all of that. When we're traveling, when we're forming teams, all of that is going to come through our newsletter over the next few weeks.
Great. Okay, I'm jumping back into the slides.
Let's do it.
Okay.
The last thing I'd say real quick is that if any of you have any young folks, and by young folks, I literally just mean younger than you, and they are not website people, they're not email people, and they want to vet us, have them go to our Instagram page, because there's a lot there that talks about the work we do and shows images and video about the how that we do it across race and age. And I think it's a pretty convincing tool. So don't try to send a bunch of links to your kids or your grandkids. Tell them to go to Instagram and we'll sell them for you.
Perfect. So I mentioned that we're going to be involved in those states in the primary season, and here are the reasons. First and foremost is partnerships. Some of these states, such as Ohio, is completely new to us, as our way of trying to connect with folks on the ground and follow their lead. For us to make the most impact, it's vital for us to have good contacts on the ground, and it takes time. It takes effort from both sides if you want to have a true partnership to put in the work. So us showing up in the primary, even though they might not have a ridiculously close election, shows our commitment and the work we can do. So when we do show up in the general election where it is more chaotic, our partners know who we are, they can trust us, and they can send us into areas where we can make the most impact. Because if you're just a random volunteer organization coming out of Seattle and they don't know you, they're most likely going to send you to areas that's going to be pretty safe for them. But once they do trust you, they will send you to areas where you can make the most impact, and that's what we want all of our volunteers to do. The second is volunteer engagement. 2024 is going to be a stressful year for all of us. It's a year that everybody feels like they need to do something. And until election season starts, the general election season starts in September, we can't ask everybody to wait 9 months until you do something. So this is our way of identifying where we can make impact and offer those opportunities. But also, there have been studies where if you do knock on doors and do contact voters and they do vote in the primary season, you significantly increase the chance of that voter participating in the general election. So your volunteer engagement in the primary season is not going to waste by you knocking on doors, making calls, sending texts. You're actually building momentum for the general election. And lastly, the general election time is quite chaotic. We're going to work in more than dozens of states. over a very short amount of time. So it is a very chaotic time at CP, and it's a very chaotic time just in general. So we really do need to rely on our team leads to be able to perform at a higher capacity and really do lead volunteers and help them engage and travel and figure out the logistics. And this is a time for us to develop our team leads for the general season as well. So this gives them an opportunity to lead teams that may be smaller, maybe there's a little bit more lower stake, and they can get the hang of things so that for the general season, they're ready to go.
Absolutely. And we'll go more into this in our following events. So let's see here. This presentation, or what we did in like the first, in the last hour and a half, have been pretty data heavy. You know, like we took you through like what worked and what didn't work for us, trends that we saw, things that that we accomplished. And if you're looking to, you know, but we also want to take the time to recognize the people that did this work, you all, right? Volunteers, people who stepped up, people who were here with us. And so we're going to have a separate event next week, literally 7 days away, Thursday, December 14th, as a way to celebrate with everybody, if you can make it, and really recognize these volunteers and our community members. So that's our December 14th event. And then finally, we will take, I don't know, rest for some part of the holiday. We'll rest and then kick off in January. And that marked this date. If you're looking for more of what just happened about like specific states, reasons for going, how to do that, where, when, why, all of that stuff, January 17th is like our kickoff to that conversation. And again, all of this is over Zoom, so it's accessible to our volunteers across the country. And send this along too. If you have anybody who might be interested in learning about us, thinking about plugging in for the year, lead them to this event. Okay, but really, until next time.
Yeah, good. Okay.
All right.
I think that's it.
That's it. Finally.
I think that's all the slides. Good.
Woo!
Can we ask a couple of questions?
Heck yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, I didn't know
Yes.
whether that was part of this. I noticed when I went to by the way, phenomenal job, all of you, and just so impressive what you do. I noticed that when I go up to the commonpower.org website, there's no way to find a phone number. And I know this sounds kind of old school, but I'm wondering whether or not it might be helpful to have a place that people can call who aren't so computer savvy, who can get information, get help navigating the website. I looked in many different ways. I clicked your contact button. It didn't lead to a page. And then I looked for phone numbers in various ways that I typically do, and I can't find phone numbers easily.
Yeah.
And I didn't find a phone number for Common Power. In order to funnel more people into the organization, I'm just kind of wondering if there is a way to provide a central point of contact that people can call without having to kind of feel their way through all of this, technology, so to speak. Just thinking it's not my issue, but I know it's a lot of people's issue. So I thought I'd raise that.
Yeah, thanks, Cliff. I will say that there's the reason why you can't find a phone number is because there's no phone number. Our office does not have a phone in it, and everyone uses their personal cell phones to do business. So it's something that we haven't done standard. I think we stopped doing it actually after the pandemic. There's a lot that's changed with organizing in business post pandemic. That said, I think that somebody will reach out to you here. I'm going to have Ben or Puya message you and get in touch with you. If you've got people who you think can only use the phone, we're happy to give them a call.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Cliff, yeah, I can share my phone number with you. And if you have questions or folks have questions, I'm more than happy to text if that's easier, or just hop on a quick call with them. Yeah, I'll just share my number with you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, Puya.
Actually, if I could just say, the issue that Cliff brought up is more widespread.
Yeah, you got some people too, Mary? Okay. All right.
Well,
All right. I'll
no,
take that.
many, I think there are many people that don't know that would like to get a telephone number.
Okay.
Not just
All right. We'll
people
do
that
some.
different.
We'll do some thinking about that. One of the things that is tough with publishing a phone number is the abuse that comes with that. So that's something that we decided to move away from, but we'll give it some more thought.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Before I let Carrie George talk about Wisconsin?
Dang,
Barbara's
were we
all in
done?
for that.
Wait. Should we pause the recording?
Oh yeah, let's do that so it's not on the record.